Please welcome Larry Hott, and you'll get to experience, you got a treat in store for you. So here's Larry Hott.
Thanks, Bill. When Bill asked me to come here, I don't think he realized just how appropriate it was, the direct connection between my career and cable television, and I'll tell you about that in a second. I'll work up to that. I've been a filmmaker for almost all my working life, but I didn't start out as such an exalted person. I was actually a much lower life form. I was a lawyer, and not that bad, because I was a legal services lawyer. I was working at Oregon Legal Services out on the West Coast on their VISTA program, and I was attracted to that program. The reason I went out there was because they promised me that I'd be able to make legal education films as part of that office. And when I got out there, I found out that they had promised the same thing to 3 or 4 other people, but there was no legal education video office. We had to create it ourselves, which was a good thing because there was no model. We could do anything we wanted. And we didn't even know where to get the equipment, so where did we go? We went to the local community access cable television station to get our equipment and our training. And when I wasn't suing welfare agencies and evil landlords, we started making films. In fact, my first film was a landlord-tenant film. It was called 5 Easy Leases. And it did very well, and we showed it on the local access station. And we followed that up with a film called How Not to Go to Small Claims Court, where I played all the roles. I was the tenant who had left all the trash, and I was the landlord who was trying, didn't want to give back the deposit, and I was the judge and all that. And then we had a real experimental film after that. It was called Retirement Disco Killers. And it was about getting your benefits, and we did health insurance and things like that. I was having a lot of fun doing this, much more fun than being a lawyer. It's really not hard to imagine, sit in court all day and lose or make videos and have a lot of fun. And just about that time, I got a call from Ken Burns. This is back in 1977 or so. And I had made films with Ken when he was a college student at Hampshire College, and we had a lot of fun doing that, and I kind of got sucked into the filmmaking community in the Valley. And when I got this call saying, why don't you come back to the East Coast and we'll start Florentine Films, and it'll be fun. You notice the word fun keeps coming up in this. And I was very naive about it. I thought, okay, I'll come back and I'll make films and I'll make a living doing that. Well, it was not a seamless transition. You don't just snap your fingers and start making a living making films. So I came back to the Valley, and I immediately got involved in the anti-nuclear movement as a lawyer. And I also started teaching business law at UMass, and I was trying to get my first film together. My first film turned out to be The Old Quabbin Valley. I don't know if anybody's seen this film, but it was a film about the battle over taking water out of the Connecticut River and diverting it into the Quabbin, which was Boston's water supply. And it was a cause célèbre. People were opposed to it out in the Valley. And the film did really well. And in fact, it helped get legislation passed that forbade the taking of water from Western Massachusetts and shunting it into Boston. So I had a big success right away. And I started doing other environmental films. And before I knew it, I had become an environmental filmmaker. And I was able to drop all my other work, and I actually started to make a living as a filmmaker. My wife, Diane Gary, started working with me almost from the beginning, so that we were a couple doing this, which I highly recommend to anybody who thinks they're going to go into film, is don't do it alone, because you need somebody's shoulder to cry on almost daily. About this time, I was approached by a man named Tom Lewis. He was a professor at Skidmore, and he asked me if I was interested in doing a film about the interstate highway system. He already had some research money, so of course I said yes. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, highways, nothing could be more concrete. It just didn't sound like it was very interesting. But having been an experienced filmmaker by then, I knew that if you wanted to make films, you would have to take subjects that you might not want to do and figure out a way to not only make them interesting for an audience, but make them interesting for yourself. So I started doing the research, and right away I found out that it was worse than I thought. I thought, okay, we can use the landscapes, and that will be visually interesting. But I found out right away the reason that they were federal highways is that they were built to standard specifications. All the highways look the same, and if you ever wonder why it's so boring, to drive on the interstate highways is because they have to be the same width and they have to have the same guardrails and everything looks the same. So that was the first problem I came up with. And then I realized if I wanted to interview people along the highway, it was going to be too noisy. I wouldn't be able to hear anything they had to say, and it was going to either be too hot or too cold, or there'd be too many bugs, and it's illegal. So I said, how am I going to do interviews along the highway? I don't want to do interviews in people's offices. There's nothing bothers me more than seeing a bookshelf behind somebody in an interview. So we came up with a solution, and I'm going to show you a clip that gives you an idea of what we did to make this film a little more interesting, and it has some other techniques in it. So, Jane, if you mind showing the first clip from Divided Highways.
I think in the early stages, there was a great sense of the pioneer, of movement, of dominating the wilderness to transform it. And I marvel at some of the beauty of the interstate systems and the way they've been constructed and the sheer magnitude and the huge machinery that I see building these things are just overwhelming sometimes to me. The manliness of it, the machismo of the machines. And that sometimes is overwhelming to see that sheer force that is behind the public works.
American interstate highways were built to standard specifications, but American drivers were not.
Yes, freeway driving is different, but it can be a wonderful experience. And it's an experience more and more of us will be enjoying. Once you're on the freeway, you must adjust to faster speeds. At these speeds, inattention, even for a second, can lead to trouble.
Of course, you got your two kids in the back seat hitting each other, and this is what you do. I don't care who hit who first. You will now stop. This is one of the great political strategies of all time, and if we just had more mothers in office, there would be peace in the Middle East today.
A question often asked is, which lane should I drive in? Well, that depends somewhat on your speed. Generally speaking, faster traffic uses the left lane.
Not here in Miami. Left lane can be for anything. Left lane can be for stopping and changing your tire.
The highway rule is, stay back 1 car length for every 10 miles of speed.
The Miami Interstate is distinct from all other interstates in that it is populated by Miami drivers, and everyone here is driving according to the law of his individual country of origin, or in some cases, planet of origin.
Well, Texas drivers are pretty friendly. The state motto is drive friendly. But there's a part of that story that doesn't get told. They're partly friendly because they're drinking beer.
It was legal. It was legal in those days. In fact, we just outlawed driving while drinking a year or so ago in this state. Actually, it's not illegal to drive while drinking. It's illegal to have a can in your hand when you're stopped.
Many drivers here are armed and will signal our traffic intentions with weaponry.
Our fine new freeways have been designed to provide a more convenient, safer journey for all of us.
On November 6, 1956, President Eisenhower was re-elected in a landslide victory. 8 days later, the first section of the new interstate highway system opened near Topeka, Kansas, 70 miles east of Eisenhower's boyhood home of Abilene.
There was 2 major projects going, nationwide projects. That'd be the interstate road system and the space program. And the space program definition was clear from its highest level down. Congress supported it. The schools changed their curriculum to train engineers for the space age. So everybody's saying space is good. I think the interstate highway system was kind of in the background. Major project, much greater project. But people didn't talk about it very much. Locally, when a piece of road opened up, there was some kind of ribbon cutting ceremony, and people started using it.
What did people see when they looked at the highway? Well, we've got some clues. We can assume they saw escape, they saw adventure. The popular culture is filled with it. The songs.
Get your motor running, out on the highway, born to be wild. I was in the original Steppenwolf. A lot of people don't realize that.
Really? Well, I don't remember Dave being there, but I know I was. In fact, I still am. And I remember doing this way back in '67. Get your motor running. They head out on the highway, looking for adventure in whatever comes our way. Yeah, darling, go make it happen. Take the world in a love embrace. Fire all of your guns at once and explode into space. Like a true nature's child, we were born to be wild. We can climb so high, I never wanna die. Born to be wild, etc.
Okay.
We will return with Divide.
Okay. There's a lot of stuff in this clip that I use when I teach to show students how to get around the problem of a subject that seems deadly dull. The first thing we did there was the green screen. And we chose the green screen to get around the problems I mentioned of how do you shoot people on the highways without it being dangerous, too hot, or too noisy. We also wanted to make sure we had movement in every frame of the film. So the thing to do was just sit them down in front of a green screen and ask them questions. All right, that's easy enough, and it worked pretty well. But we did something else. We brought with us to every session a steering wheel. And we gave it to every interviewee, and we asked them to turn their chair and just keep talking. And then we said we'd ask them a question. And Molly Ivins there, she turned and started playing around with what happens with the kids in the back seat. And that's Dave Barry there. And he started talking about driving in Miami. And there's another man there talking about drinking beer in Texas. It's all fake, and it's obviously fake. It's supposed to be fake, but it's fun. Our motto in every film we do is we want to elevate it a little bit. We want to take a little bit out of the ordinary. We can't always find that thing, but at least we're trying. We say, what can we do that the audience has not seen before? And that's why John Kay is in there singing Born to be Wild a cappella. Well, he's in there for another good reason. It was too expensive for us to buy the original version. And yet, when we were making the film, everybody would say to us, oh, you're going to have Born to be Wild by Steppenwolf in the film, aren't you? And we said, oh, sure. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, one is I don't want to spend $20,000 for the rights. And two, I don't want to do what everybody else does and what's expected. But how do I get the song in, without doing what's expected? So we called up John Kay's agent, who was more than happy to ask him to be in the film because he's a has-been. You know, he wanted to appear on film. And there's another lesson in that, which is that there's no harm in asking. We get all kinds of celebrities to do stuff for our films just by calling up and saying, please. Maybe it has something to do with public television, but if you don't ask, you're not gonna get anywhere at all. So that's one lesson for aspiring filmmakers. I'm going to skip way ahead in our career, and I'm going to show a clip from a film that just came out this year. It's called Through Deaf Eyes. And it's like Divided Highways, which is showing at the Northampton Film Festival tomorrow, November 4th at 6 p.m. Through Deaf Eyes is going to show next weekend on Saturday night. So I thought it's appropriate to show a clip from that, but also talk a little bit about the challenges of making that film. I think the subject matter will be obvious from also the title, but also from the clip. So there's a little bit of funding information at the head, and we lost something when we got rid of VHS tapes, because you can cue them at wherever you want, and they always worked. With DVDs, you don't know where it's going to go, and every DVD machine is different. So we're going to try to get this queued up at the beginning of the film.
Welcome to the future. PBS Digital.
This program has been made possible by the National Endowment for the Humanities, expanding America's understanding for more than 30 years of who we were, who we are, and who we will be.
Major funding for Through Deaf Eyes is provided by the Annenberg Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
I was driving down on the freeway. Oh, it was a beautiful day. All the birds were flying, and all the birds were thinking, and all the birds dropping. Hey, you! I got you there. All of a sudden, I looked at the rearview mirror. The guy behind me was so angry. Hey, you! What are you, deaf, huh? Wow, that makes me angry. Of course, I'm deaf and proud. Do I step on the gas? Oh, by the way, I have a Mercedes 500 SEL. I'm rich and deaf. Thank you very much. Finally, I caught up with that car. Automatic window. Hey, you! What are you hearing? Huh? Yeah.
When you talk to people who can hear, and you ask them, what do you think it would be like to be a deaf person? Then all if they're thinking is, well, I couldn't do this, can't. They would start listing all the things they can't do. And I don't think like that. Deaf people don't think like that. We think about what we can do.
We sign, we make movies, we do stage performances, we can write books. But we make ourselves understood.
Say the word airplane. Airplane.
Let's take a quiz. Ready? True or false? All deaf people use sign language. Sign language is universal. Deaf people live in a silent world. Having a deaf child is a tragedy. All deaf people would like to be cured. Hint: the answers are all going to be false.
There was a little...
I could go on for 2 hours. This film came to me from WETA television in Washington, D.C. They called and I asked us if we were interested in the topic. Living in Northampton, I knew that this was a hornet's nest. Clark School for the Deaf is here. It's an oral school. The American School for the Deaf, which was the original deaf school in the United States in Hartford, is a signing school. They've been at each other's throats, so to speak, since 1817. So I knew I was getting in the middle of something that could be very problematic, and I wasn't wrong. In fact, when I made a presentation at Gallaudet University, the only deaf university in the world in Washington, D.C., when we were just starting the project, I was attacked. I was attacked for being a hearing filmmaker who would dare to take on this subject. But the reason I was asked to do it was because there were no deaf filmmakers in the United States who would make national documentaries, films that could be shown on PBS at the national level. So we reluctantly took on this job, but we decided we had to do something to get around the political problem. And the first thing we did, of course, was we had a panel of deaf advisors, and that's normal. And then we said we have to go a little further than that. So we took one of those panelists and we made him our principal deaf advisor. We brought somebody in to the inner sanctum. We want you to be a confidant. We don't want you to tell any questions we ask you to go outside this room. You're going to tell us honestly, are we approaching this correctly? Are we in trouble with the approach we're taking? But it still left something hanging, which was why we were not working with a deaf co-producer. And we actually, that was a hard question. Why weren't we working with a deaf co-producer? And it was the same answer as why a deaf producer wasn't making the film in the first place. If there wasn't somebody who had done productions on a national level, then who were we going to find who could we work with that understood what we had to go through to get a national film made? But that didn't mean there weren't good deaf filmmakers out there. They just weren't making our kind of films. So we said, well, what if we had a deaf filmmaker make a section for us? And they said, well, that's good. Well, why don't we do more of that? So eventually what happened is we decided, why don't we have at least 6 deaf filmmakers make films to be incorporated within the film? And it took a long time, but we eventually got the National Endowment for the Arts to give us a grant just for that. And we commissioned 6 filmmakers, 6 deaf filmmakers, to make films about their lives. And at the beginning, you saw clips from that quick cutting stuff that we actually like, are scenes from the deaf filmmakers' films. And then later on in the film, you see their films in their entirety as they relate to subjects in the film. For example, there's a deaf filmmaker's film called Equilibrium about life with 2 cochlear implants, and it comes in our section of the film about cochlear implants. Or there's a film about the cinematic nature of sign language, how you can do close-ups in slow motion in sign language, and that's the way people who use sign language talk. They talk in almost film language. And we introduce that with a sign language expert talking about the cinematic nature, and then go right into a film that uses those techniques. And this is how we elevated this film up from just interviews. It's interesting enough just to have sign language interviews, but we wanted to be more than that. This film has been an enormous success because there are still many families dealing with deaf children, deaf infants particularly, and how they should be educated. And when we go out on the blogs now and see what people are writing, they say that they're using this film as part of their education. Actually, I just want to say something about blogs in relation to cable television. Google Alerts and other things on the web allow you to type in a phrase and then get a notice every time that phrase appears anywhere. If your phrase is distinctive enough, like through deaf eyes, you will find out every time it's mentioned. We did that a few weeks before the broadcast of this film, and we were able to find out every review, article, and blog entry about the film, and the blog entries were fascinating. There was one group of deaf activists who ran a contest for the best critique of the film, and that's how we found out that the radical sign language community felt that our film was about pathology, and that the radical oral community felt that our film was a pro-sign language film. Well, and then we felt that, of course, we'd done a good job because we felt we were right in the middle, which is where we wanted to be. I have 2 more clips I want to show if we have time. A short one from our film John James Audubon, Drawn from Nature, which will show next Saturday at the Northampton Film Festival at 3:30. This was a film we did for American Masters. And the reason I want to show this clip is because it relates directly to the idea of what you can do with new technologies. We're going to go to the chapters, and then go to passenger pigeons. It's just a 2-minute section. Right.
In the summer of 1816, the crops froze 3 times and failed. People went hungry. At least there was to be one thing to eat that summer. A flock of passenger pigeons was about to come through Kentucky. A flock of over 1 billion birds.
I arrived 2 hours before sunset. Everything was ready and all eyes were gazing on the clear sky. Suddenly there burst forth a general cry of, "Here they come!"
The pigeons are coming in by the thousands. They sit down on the branches snap, and they fall on the birds sitting beneath them, knocking them out. There's such a din that you can't even hear people shooting. You just see the fire around you. This general mayhem.
It was a scene of uproar and confusion. The pigeons were constantly coming, and it was past midnight before I perceived a decrease in the number. For a week or more, the population fed on no other flesh than that of pigeons.
Audubon gives us a graphic picture of a bloodbath that really makes us think too about what's going on there.
People unacquainted with these birds might naturally conclude that such dreadful havoc would soon put an end to the species. But I have satisfied myself that nothing but the gradual diminution of our forests can accomplish their decrease.
This is a tray of passenger pigeon study skins, much like the specimens that John Audubon would have prepared. Passenger pigeon is a beautiful pigeon. The males have this beautiful and turquoise iridescent pattern on the back, brick red or plum color on the breast, nice spotting pattern on their back, but a large pigeon. Unfortunately, it's extinct. It was shot by early market hunters in the early 1800s. and got to a critical level where it just wouldn't reproduce anymore. And so unfortunately went extinct by the early 1900s.
Okay. Why I like this clip is because I love the way that it works when the birds fall into the drawer. And what happened was I was visiting the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, where those birds are in a drawer. And those are, many of those birds are actually Audubon's passenger pigeons, pigeons he shot. And that man there, Nate Rice, was showing me the drawer, and he pulled it out. And I had already written into the shooting script that we would use animation. But when I saw those birds there, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could have the end of that scene and the birds fall into the drawer? This is one of those great things where it actually worked, you know, because you put a lot of money into some of these things, and then they're on the editing room floor or they're in the video trash bin. I called the animator that we've been working with, and I described what I wanted to do, and he said, have you shot it yet? And I said, no. And he said, thank God. He said, I have to be there. I said, what do you mean? I've never had any animator, any graphics person with me on a shoot before. He said, you're not going to get the registration right. You're not going to understand how this works. This is complicated stuff. So we took the train down from New York to Philadelphia, and we went in there, and I'm so glad he showed up, because that all had to be shot backwards. It involved multiple moves with a jib and registration. It was extremely complicated. We shot it in all kinds of different ways. Besides which, the animator went through the museum to the dioramas and took pictures of all the passenger pigeons in various poses. And as we started working together, he would give us these pencil tests, which they used to literally be pencil tests. Now they're just graphic tests. And one day he called me up and he said, how does a passenger pigeon fly? I said, I don't know, they're all dead, they're extinct. You know? So I called my experts, and they said, well, they fly like mourning doves or pigeons. So the animator said, well, where can I get that? And I said, where do you live? And he said, well, around the corner from Washington Square in New York. I said, well, go out with a camera. So the movement of those passenger pigeons are taken from his own videos with a cheap video camera that he then used the rotoscope technique to get that motion of the birds flying. Animation has come way, way down in price. The key to animation is you're paying somebody for their talent and how to draw. And to imagine things and make it aesthetically beautiful. But you don't have to do the cell animation that used to cost thousands and thousands of dollars to do before. So now we pay somebody for their time. And if they're generous, they also donate some of their computer time for us, which can be expensive. The democratization of film is not just in the equipment that you have in the editing equipment, but it's across the board. And you can get people to create things for you that are beautiful and interesting and allow you to do creative things like have pigeons fall out of the sky and land in the drawer. I'm going to show one more clip. This is from a film called Imagining Robert. This is a film finished a few years ago. It's about J. and Robert Neugebauer. J. Neugebauer was the writer in residence at UMass for 25 years, a very accomplished fiction and nonfiction writer. His younger brother, Robert, had been on the back wards of mental hospitals for 40 years. And Jay wrote a book about getting his brother out of those units, trying to get his brother out of those units and into a more normal life. And at the time the book was published, Robert, the younger brother, was still in a psychiatric hospital in New York State. I approached Jay and I said, are you interested in making a film about this? And he said, you bet I am. So Jay and I hopped in a car and we went down to the South Street Psychiatric Center in Staten Island to take Robert out on a day pass. And when we brought Robert back to the hospital, I started filming with a Hi8, an old style video camera. And before I knew it, the administrator of the hospital and 6 burly security guards grabbed us, basically arrested us, confiscated the camera, and demanded to see what was on there because they said we were violating all the rules of the hospital and they wanted to erase anybody whose image on there was not authorized. Well, then I knew I really had a good story. And there was no way I was going to let them have my tape, and we spent 2 or 3 hours fighting about this. And finally we got out of there. And then what followed was 5 years of intense filmmaking. However, we had no budget at all. I was using all kinds of video cameras. As soon as digital video came out, I bought a digital video camera. When better ones came out, I bought another one. And I did all the camera work myself. And this is the only film I've ever made where I did all the camera work. I made every mistake you could possibly make. And I knew the mistakes I was making because I didn't have the money to hire a lighting crew. I didn't even have the money for a sound man. So we were still able to make a film because content is king. So I'm going to show you a few minutes of a clip from the middle of this film. This is the VHS tape. Okay. Sit down so you're facing me and your mother at the same time. Get in as close as you can. And turn towards me a little bit. How's this?
Remember your other son? Robert? When I say Robert, you remember Robert and me growing up together? I saw Robert last week, and he's in a very good place in New York City, and we live 6 blocks away from each other. Isn't that amazing?
Remember that?
Robert got out of the hospital, Mama. I didn't go for that shit. He wanted me back in the hospital.
School and things like that.
When Robert was at Creedmoor, we were involved in something called multifamily group therapy.
Remember that?
Yeah. Each patient had his family members arrive and they talk about things together, problems, family therapists, like group therapists.
There'd be usually 3 families, an intern or a resident, and a guard.
I don't remember a guard.
Yeah, there was always a guard in the room. And the theory behind it was that families, by seeing how other families reacted, could understand themselves better.
You could see how each family was sick. And some families were sicker than the other. They all had bad children and good children. Like Sophia would say. A good son was Billy, a bad son was Marty.
And in one session, my mother said something about nobody loving her, Robert not loving her. Why does he say and do these things or something? And Robert got up with this kind of grin on his face, walked across the room, bent over to kiss her. And I remember my mother smiling, see? And he bent over and he backed off. And my mother looked at her and said, he bit me. And she started bleeding.
I broke her nose.
You bit her nose?
Yeah.
He bit her nose and she was bleeding. And my mother, who was a very histrionic woman, and at that point became totally calm, and she turned to the therapist and said,
now, doctor, could you explain to me, why does my son do these things?
the sessions were wild. After a while, I felt they were counterproductive. I felt that they were
repetitive, deja vu.
They were really continuing the kind of stuff that went on in our home. Remember Robert? Sure you do, yeah.
And my mother was always going to the next doctor who was promising a cure. The one she came with was Dr. Cott, who said, he said to me, Mrs. Neugebauer, throw away your Freud. I'm going to cure Robert. And this was with something called orthomolecular therapy, which is mega doses of vitamins to counteract the supposed toxins in Robert's system or the imbalances. When Robert would not be, quote, cured, then my mother would go on long tantrums, weeping, saying, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? My father and I would just have to spend hours trying to calm her down.
So to tell her.
Don't
It doesn't look like her, Jay.
It doesn't, huh?
As I remember.
You want to sit up?
No, they did.
1970, I remember. I came home for a weekend. Robert was in Creedmoor Hospital at the time, and my mother had been to Florida, had seen Century Village, and said she was moving there. And I remember my father being very, very upset. May have been that time, another time I came in, and I remember he was actually down on the floor on his knees, and he was saying, Annie, he's saying, I beg of you, one doesn't abandon a child. He's our son and he's sick. And my mother said, I can't take it anymore. And she looked over to me and she said, Jay, she said, listen,
let the state take over. I can't do it anymore. She said, nobody knows what it's like to have a son. A
Child with mental illness is worse than death.
And she just couldn't take it. And in some ways, who knows? I mean, certainly.
I'm crying.
When she and Robert were together, it did not seem
Take my hand off you. It's okay.
In some ways, it wasn't. It gave him a chance, maybe, to reconstruct his own life without her being around.
I didn't like seeing my mother stretch out like that, squirming. I kept saying, Robert's out of the hospital now. He wanted me in the hospital. My Uncle Paul, too, I bet. I can't take him anymore. What does the mood do with him? He's an insane young man.
A lot of parents have said to me, I wish I'd had your mother's courage. I wish I could have left my kid because it's been awful. The last time my mother saw Robert was probably 15 years ago. She came up north for my cousin's bat mitzvah. Robert came also. He was out of the hospital, and we were all gathered in a restaurant that night. My mother's there, and she turns and she reaches across the table to this man, and she says, "Oh, hello, I'm Ann Nugaborn. Who are you?" And Robert says, "I'm Robert Gary, your son." And he shakes her hand, and she hadn't recognized him. And that was the last time she ever saw him, as far as I can remember.
My mother, she was a nurse. 1935. Ann E. Nugaborn. Cambridge, what's that say? Something.
My mother did, I must say, she did, until the Alzheimer's came, she would thank me all the time for taking care of Robert.
I must have seen this, 500 times. It's still really hard to watch. What's the mother doing in there? What kind of filmmaker would put a woman in Alzheimer's, with Alzheimer's in the middle of a film like this? Remember I said that we're always trying to push the envelope. We're trying to elevate the film a little bit. The story is all about the younger son's relationship with his mother. She was still alive. Jay's relationship with his mother, she's still alive. The best way I felt to get that in the film was to interview him next to his mother. And what came out, you saw what came out. And then to show the film to Robert so he could react to it, so he could know what was going on. I was trying to be transparent the whole time. So it's not like groundbreaking technique, it's just saying, all right, I'm going to push the bounds, the ethical bounds here a little bit and see what happens. First time I showed this in public to a group of family members for the National Association for the Mentally Ill, I was really nervous. I thought they were going to attack me for putting the mother in the film. To a person, they thanked me. They said, "This has been my experience." Well, that's a good segue to questions, because that has been my experience, too, making films, trying to get a rise out of people, trying to get them to pay attention. I think the last thing I want to say is that when I first started out as a filmmaker in the Valley, I came to the original Northampton Cable TV studio in the high school when it was above the auditorium to take a studio television class. And I was wondering, whatever happened to that studio? Where did it go? And I'm so glad to see that it's come back. Thanks for having me.
Time for a couple of questions, and then we have Stevie Converse coming up next from Free Press, again to build on what's been said here. So, does anyone have any questions of Larry Hott?
That's the question right in the front row.
Oh.
Larry, your ideas. There are 50 million children in the United States. 30 million of them belong to immigrants who are illegal and are in danger to be deported. How will you portray what is happening to the mental health of those children that already have parents put out of the country? All of these children are American citizens?
Well, let me answer that in a different way, because I don't think I'm prepared to say how I would make a film about that issue. But we are constantly being asked to take on films that we are not very familiar with the material. And some of when they're history films, we feel more comfortable. But when they're films that are ongoing, I actually prefer that the films be made by the people who are experiencing it at that time, if that's possible. So like you saw with the deaf film, that we felt we were uncomfortable making the film about deaf issues and not being deaf ourselves. I would feel uncomfortable making a film about the mental health of the children of illegal immigrants when those children actually could be making those films themselves. And that's exactly what a cable access television station would allow them to do. But you're asking, I'm sure you're asking this, but there is a mentoring process that's necessary. Because when a lot of people start out making films, it takes them several films to work through all the mistakes. And some people are great and they get it right away. But other people say, I wish I knew now what I did when I started out. And it's their third or fourth film to get to the point where it can be watched beyond a small audience and appreciated, or at least hold people's attention for more than 5 or 10 minutes. So I was, during the break, I was thinking about how how to address some of these questions for people who want to get in to producing films. Maybe I'll take another question and I'll come back to it. I'll see if that question comes up. Are there any more questions?
Wait. No?
Oh, I have another.
All right. Well.
Oh, hang on. I mean, it's.
Sure. Wait till your microphone.
There you go.
Okay. Here in Massachusetts, and maybe a sample of what's happening around the country, there is a process by which each community can participate in evaluating how well the community television station is doing. It's been an effort to make that not a local process but a state process here in Massachusetts. Is that happening, in your knowledge, throughout the country? Because apparently the only people's television, the only media that is truly independent now, other than PBS and NPR, is the community cable, and that's under attack. My question is, what do you see the trend to be, and what do you see people interested in preserving people's media doing?
Oh, okay. I can only answer part of that question because I'm not an expert on cable television or regulation, but I do follow the trends in distribution of films, and I know that there's a big difference between being able to make one film and get it out and it's seen, and being able to continue making films for a living. And this goes to the question of how films are distributed and how people are paid for them. And there is a real conflict there, because the people who make the films and want them widely distributed, at the same time they want to maintain control over their intellectual property. In other words, they want to be able to charge for the use of that property and make a living at it. And the internet, which makes things available through digitization, also makes it easy for people to take other people's work. So therefore you have this conflict between getting paid for your work and giving it away free at the same time. If you have an idealistic view that you want to make media so that everybody can see it and people can do what they want with it, well, then you can't do it as a full-time job, because you will not be getting paid unless foundations are paying you to make free material. And right now we're in this big moment of flux with the internet, because nobody knows how to really make money off of it. And that definitely influences whether people are going to produce for it or not. You can't get away from capitalism as an economic driver of film production and what's available on the internet. And that's why most of what you see on YouTube limits, because of other issues, films to 10 minutes, but it also removes anything that they've been notified is under copyright. So I'm not sure if I'm directly answering your question, but this is one of the biggest issues in filmmaking today. Yes, there's a question in the back.
Well, if it's really true that we can learn the technique, it sounds ridiculous, in a half hour, without forgetting how to tie our shoes or something else we already knew. How do we learn, I mean the digital technique, how do we learn the other parts about making an attractive film? I think we can't learn that here.
Well, let me, people do hear this expression, you can learn how to edit, you can learn how to use the equipment in a very short amount of time. They say a half hour, okay, that's an exaggeration. Really, you can take an editing workshop and maybe learn, and in a week, become very familiar with the technique. But it takes a lifetime to learn how to write well. And it takes a lifetime to learn how to think and to be informed. So yes, it's true, it's been democratized. You can buy that equipment now fairly easily. You can learn how to edit fairly quickly. But you have to have a different kind of education. You have to, for example, when students say to me, what should I do to become a filmmaker? I don't say, go out and learn the equipment. That's because you can open a book and learn the equipment, or you can have somebody teach you. You can take a workshop in it. What you need to do is you need to be informed by the humanities. You need to take English literature classes, writing classes. Last night, I heard a first-time filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, say that she had been told that she needed a writer. And she said, a writer for documentaries? Who knew? And I thought, okay, well, maybe she's a little naive, and maybe she was thinking about documentaries that don't have narration. But when you watch a documentary that doesn't have narration, it still has structure. And every word that's in that documentary is written down by the people who are editing it, because they have a transcript, and they're putting it and piecing it together. And whenever you take, say, an interview subject off camera, you have the opportunity to move their words around and cut out words and piece them together and make people sound better than they naturally do. Unless you're a real purist, you're going to do that because you don't want the ums and ahs in there. So there's a film grammar as well as a real English grammar that goes into filmmaking. And that takes a longer time to learn. Now, some people have raw talent. They're just creative. And they're maybe good musicians, and they're already good writers. And maybe they have a good eye. But it's going to take them time to learn how to put all those things together. You don't cut like the opening to the deaf film that you saw there with 5 minutes of editing experience. You really have to understand how things flow. You have to understand pacing and timing and how to cut to music. That takes time. So there's no instant solution to it. You don't become a great filmmaker just because you have the equipment. But the equipment now is available and allows you to work on it easily without having to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars first. Our average film takes us 5 years. Usually it's 4 years of fundraising and 1 year of making the film. But you don't have to do that if you're not going for the top-end professional film for a national public television broadcast. You can start with raising enough money to buy a camera for a couple of $1,000s and an editing system for a couple of $1,000. And then you can go out into the world and make your film. You might still have to raise some money to say you want to buy the rights to music or archives, or you need to travel, or you need to pay for the finishing costs to do the color correction and the sound mix and all those type of things. But at least you can get to the point where you can show somebody that it works. So filmmaking is not yet at the level of a yellow pad and a pencil. And it will never be there, because just because you have a yellow pad and a pencil doesn't mean that you can write literature. It means that you can make marks on the page. So right now, everybody can make marks on the page, the equivalent page of film, and put something together, but it's not necessarily going to be great. But at least the access to it is better than it ever has been. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Larry. Thank you.